We've heard a bunch about the NAR settlement lately. It's been all over the news, and today we're going to talk about that and more. Is it really the end of real estate as we know it? To hear that and more, stay tuned.
The Den, powered by the Lyons Group, a show dedicated to exploring hot topics in real estate, local happenings, and industry trends. We're a small team of professionals approaching $400 million in sales and nearly 2,000 local transactions. You're listening to time-tested experts and industry leaders. Here's a refreshing look at real estate happenings and more. Welcome to The Den.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's episode of The Den, powered by the Lyons Group. And today we're going to be talking about the now famous NAR settlement. If you haven't heard about the NAR settlement, you're probably living in a cave or you have no interest in real estate whatsoever. But if you have, we're here to enlighten you on some of the topics that are really going to impact buyers and sellers. But before we get to that, let me introduce my partners, my friends, my co-hosts, the fellow members of the Lyons Group. To my left, Paul, hand me the rockberry, Melissa, let's go, Glasgow, Aspen, the ninja, Groen, and Shannon, the boss, Martin Martinez. And my name is Ben Lyons, and I'm the host of The Den. And welcome to today's episode. So this really, we could take 2 hours and talk about this.
Or
more easily. This has been the topic of conversation the last few weeks. And it all started with a case that came out of Missouri, the Sitzer-Burnett case. And it really is a fascinating case for a large number of reasons. But we're going to break it down today and just really talk about how it's going to affect you as either a realtor, a buyer, or a seller. And is it going to change anything, or is there going to be dramatic changes in the industry? So, Melissa, let's start with you, president of the San Juan County Board of Realtors.
Yes.
Why don't you give us some insight into your thoughts on what's happening in today's news?
Absolutely. So, the main reason why this class action lawsuit came about was because sellers were confused as to how their money was being spent on their commissions, the commissions they were paying out. Now, in New Mexico, I feel that we've been able to educate our sellers pretty well with our forms that we have provided to us. We always like to joke like, another form revision, another form. But I think that they really do help our sellers and our clients in this industry in New Mexico. What we're going to be seeing is some different ways to practice our real estate businesses, which I think end result will help with more communication. We're going to have to make sure that our buyers and our sellers are more educated about the processes of buying and selling real estate. And I think it's going to be a good thing. I think it's going to really make everybody feel like they're making a very good decision in their process.
Yeah, and I think that's been one of the biggest problems in our industry. And you all can jump in on this, but the lack of education with the consumers. Like, it's our job as realtors to help consumers understand the process, right? Understand what their fees are, understand how people are being compensated. And we've really kind of, as an industry, worked toward transparency. This settlement may be pushing us into a different arena a little bit, but our goal has always been transparency. And I can speak for myself, obviously I can't speak for anybody else, but I love transparency. The more transparency, the better for the consumer. Mm-hmm. Aspen, what are your thoughts on the case and how it's going to shake out? What are some of the main components that people need to be aware of with the changes coming up?
I think one thing that's going to be probably the biggest change, because one thing we all know, and hopefully all of our sellers know, is it's always been negotiable. Commission has always been negotiable. I agree with Melissa. In Colorado and Mexico, it very clearly states who's getting what. I think one thing that was a little bit that will bring more to light is the buyers didn't understand how we were getting paid. And I think we hear, especially a lot of new realtors say, buyers don't pay anything, it's free. Well, that's not really true. The buyer is getting the loan. You're still paying your realtor, just maybe on the back end side a little bit. So I think this will really bring up a lot more communication with the buyers, which I think was needed. So I think that's a really good thing. But one thing we're going to see a lot more of is buyer broker agreements. NAR is requiring them now. So before any showing, we have to go over the buyer broker agreements. And I think that's going to be a big shock for a lot of buyers who are used to just requesting a showing and the realtor jumps and we go see it. And now there's going to be a sit down meeting beforehand. We're going to go over how we're getting paid, what we would like to be paid. And I think that's going to be a big shock for a lot of buyers, but I think it will take a little bit of adjustment, but maybe in a year or two, it'll be the new norm. Mm-hmm. And we won't even notice.
Yep. And those are great points. And I think, there's a lot of insight, people with their takes on the different facets of the case and how that's going to play out into the real world. But you could almost boil it down to two major changes. And Paul, why don't you take this one? What exactly are the two major changes in our industry, and how will that affect things from your point of view?
Well, the two things that the NAR settlement does is removes buyer-broker agreements off the MLS. So there's no more co-broke, is what we call it. There's no more agreement between brokers that there's going to be commission paid to the buyer's broker.
Not publicly anyways.
Publicly, yeah.
Yeah.
So no more on the MLS. It also says that we can't put it on any other sites or do like another website or a mechanism that advertises commissions. The other thing it does is requires, even before the first showing with a buyer, to have a buyer-broker agreement signed. And I think the thing that one does is the one people talk the least about. And now before a buyer starts the process, they have to agree that if a seller does not agree to pay a commission, that they are
on the hook.
They are on the hook to pay the buyer's broker or to pay their broker.
Yeah.
So that's going to be a big change. And I think lending hasn't been figured out as we get into contracts with these buyers, and then they go get qualified. That has to factor in. So you almost need 2 pre-qualifications. It's going to be a big change, but I think we've done a lot of work already to figure out educating our clients is the number one thing. But I think this is going to be pretty navigable once we actually get into it.
Yeah, once the rubber hits the road, right?
Yeah, and that's not till mid-July, they think, is the deadline for all this to be in place. We're supposed to get some more guidance in mid-May. NAR is supposed to vote on these changes. It'll start trickling down to the states and to the local associations.
Yeah, yeah.
What I really like about, the buyer broker agreement is that we're in New Mexico, our agreement is 7 pages, I think it is?
For the buyer broker.
For the buyer broker.
Yeah.
So what that identifies is things that we should be communicating anyways, our broker duties, the things that we owe to not only this buyer, but everybody involved in the transaction. And then also, it's not just what we're providing, but what the buyer needs to provide back.
Sure.
Their due diligence in getting their pre-qualification, their communication with their lender, their not changing their financial situations, things like these. It's not just one person doing all the work in the transaction. The buyers have a lot of responsibility to complete their transaction as well.
Yeah, it's a contract.
Yeah.
It's a contract, and there's responsibilities on both sides.
Yeah.
And I think you bring up a really good point, Melissa, in the sense that as the consumer, or if you're a listener right now, maybe you've bought or sold a property, you understand how we used to do things, right? There's a new norm coming. But the way we used to do things is we would meet up with buyers, or maybe not meet up with them, get them set up with a lender and get them going. And then at the point that they get pre-qualified or pre-approved, we'd go out and start showing properties, right? That was kind of the way to go. It was pretty rare that realtors took that next step and formalized that agreement between buyer and realtor, saying that, hey, we're going to work together and I'm due compensation for all of my time. I may run around for 6 months or a year. In some instances, I ran around with buyers for multiple years. It would be nice to have some type of agreement between that buyer and the realtor that's representing them, to understand who's paying what, right? Where's the compensation there, and how are they going to get paid? If the seller's not offering that cooperating compensation, then the buyer is ultimately responsible for that. So the big change is now, before showing a property, we have to have that agreement in hand. We have to have that signed agreement. So a lot of the buyers may not know you, and then you're asking them to sign this agreement, and vice versa. You may not know them, may not want to work with them. So Shannon, talk to me about the problems and maybe the benefits of this new move with NAR in regard to the buyer broker.
The buyer broker agreement, there's things I like and things I don't like for the very reasons you just talked about. I think that it's nice to have something formally written with a buyer telling them what their responsibilities are, what your responsibilities are. I like the idea of that. And I like the idea that they are now in some way obligated to you. Sometimes we do an awful lot of work for people and they may not really understand how it works. There's nothing worse than working for somebody for, 3 months, and we've tirelessly looked at houses, and, you've helped them clean up a few things so they can get pre-qualified, and, you've given them a lot of direction on, maybe what they need to do to, save their down payment, whatever it is. We put a lot of effort into people, and to get that call on a Sunday and they say, hey, just to let you know, I went to an open house today and this house was just perfect for me. So I went ahead and wrote an offer on it with the realtor that was there.
And that's happened to all of us, right?
And, it really very frustrating. And you sometimes your buyers don't even realize that they're damaging you or that they've really taken something away from you. So I like the buyer broker agreement in those aspects. What I don't like, what you just went back to, is that first initial contact with someone, having to tell them, I need you to sign this agreement that you're going to be obligated to me. What if I show them a few houses and I realize that maybe they're toxic, or maybe they're just not ready, they're going to waste my time, or we just don't jive? We've fired clients before. There are some people you can't work with. Mm-hmm. Same with them. What happens if they get 3 houses into me and they say, I don't jive with this gal. I don't like her very much. I like people to have those freedoms. I like people to be able to say, I want to work with who I'm comfortable with. So it's a bit of an uncomfortable situation making someone sign an agreement with you on the first time you're meeting them. I hope that the public doesn't start getting offended by that when we start that and start feeling like we're just trying to trap them, because that's not the case. It really is an obligation of ours now. I think there's good. I think there's bad.
Yeah.
I think it's a crapshoot. And
the public is really, what we're focused on right now, because there's going to be a learning curve, right? Because we're in the business, we've been having conversations. We've looked at different strategies. We talked about all the hypotheticals. We've gone down the rabbit holes as professionals, as leaders in this industry. Right here in this room, we've had multiple conversations about how this is going to play out.
Too many.
Yeah. We've talked about beating a dead horse. Tired. Yeah. Well, the horse hasn't even died yet. Okay. So we're still dragging it along. But at some point, the rubber's going to hit the road and the general public has to catch up. So how do you see that from the general public's, when we start, engaging them and saying, hey, you got to sign this before I even show you a property?
I had the analogy right away of going onto a used car lot and 5 used car salesmen come up to you and say, you've got to use me. You've got to use me. Here, sign this. This is saying here, you're going to pay me and you're going to buy a car on this lot. Like, I'm just looking to see if what's out there, If you go from that sense, if that's the way you think the public's going to be, how do you make it so it doesn't feel like that? We've come up with a few things in our many, many, many conversations. The initial buyer consultation at the office, to sit down, it shows all of the services we provide, all the things that we can do. We go through the MLS and then say, if this is for you, sign this agreement. But we all do that here and not at a house.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that would be the better way to do it. And I think the public would be more educated up front, as opposed to, okay, you're still showing me houses, but now we've got to do this before we see the next one.
Yeah.
I think I guess there's more conversations that need to be had, but I think that's kind of the way I'm looking at how the public won't think we're all just used car salesmen.
Yeah. Well, and I think you do make a valid point in the sense that there may be realtors running to the client saying, here, pick me, pick me, pick me. But it's also an opportunity for others who are professionals to say, listen, I'm not going to rush into anything. I don't want you to rush into anything. Let's sit down and talk. Mm-hmm. And let's have a conversation about what you want. What is your strategy? What is your vision? And I'll explain to you how this plays out. And then we can see if there's something there. So people, the general public may have to slow down a bit, right? Because they're so used to like call or text, I want to see that property. And oftentimes they aren't even pre-approved. What are your thoughts? Can you expand on that, Melissa?
Yeah, I think that's going to be the biggest learning curve, is for buyers to not be so spoiled, if you will, by us running out and showing them a property. Because it's going to give another opportunity to just reinforce that, hey, we're asking this seller, their children, their pets, to clean up, pack up, get out of here. If you have no real intention of buying this house, it gets rid of that. I don't think it'll get rid of it, but I think it'll definitely curb it.
Yeah.
Because we do owe that duty to the sellers to only bring qualified buyers into their home.
But the reality is there's a lot of non-qualified buyers going into properties and seeing properties.
And that'll never go away.
This may curb it.
It might curb it, but yeah. I think that's where.
Well, and part of the buyer broker agreement, we have responsibility as a realtor to help them through the pre-qualification process, the pre-approval process. And it's up to us to help them with that due diligence up front. But Aspen, why don't you talk a little bit about how the compensation may look or change between what we have now, where we offer a unilateral agreement in the MLS. Now we're removing that as part of the NAR settlement. We can no longer, as Paul said earlier, advertise what our co-brokes are. That's the compensation offered out from a seller to a buyer's broker. We can't have that in the MLS anymore. How is that going to play out now, and how may that affect a buyer?
I think it's going to be really interesting. So if we look at it on the commercial side, that's pretty much how it has always been. You negotiate beforehand. When you're going into a commercial agreement, they're typically very qualified buyers. It's not a home that they're buying. It's not their first home. They've already bought and sold things before, and then they're jumping in the commercial arena. So they expect to talk about compensation beforehand. But one thing that's really going to be different is it still could be where the listing agent agrees with the seller on the buyer's broker's compensation. So the listing agent is getting paid by the seller, the listing brokerage is getting paid by the seller. And then how the buyer's broker was getting paid was it was a split of, or some percentage of the listing broker's compensation. So that's how it has been paid forever. Now, I think it's going to be really interesting. I think it actually is going to maybe cause some tension between brokers, because now it's saying that we might have a number negotiated. The seller might be willing to pay some compensation, but now we are working solely in the best interest of the seller. And you're just going to have to negotiate with your buyer and put it on a purchase agreement. And it also makes us party to the contract, which again is not uncommon in commercial, but it's very unheard of in residential. I think it's going to be really interesting. I think there's going to be a steep learning curve, and I think people are going to be frustrated when they call the listing broker and they say, well, are you offering a co-broke? And we say, you're just going to have to negotiate it in the purchase agreement.
Yeah.
I think there's going to be some contention there until we figure out the rhythm of what's the new norm is going to be.
The new norm. Yeah. And that's a great point. And it does. I mean, this is the heartburn I have, is that we take a very transparent platform, the MLS, right? And it's the most non-discriminatory, transparent platform we can have, where we're offering out a unilateral co-broke or commission to a selling agent as a listing agent. And we move that and we kind of put it in the shadows. And now it's being negotiated between brokers, and it's tied to the actual purchase agreement. Like you said, Aspen, now we're a party to the contract. And then once there's an agreement, it pops back up to light, right? So I just feel like that's a flawed process, and it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But Paul, go ahead.
One of the things that the Department of Justice, in all the things that I've read, is saying that the buyers never had an opportunity to negotiate. Mm-hmm. If you get into a buyer-broker agreement for a lower percentage and then the seller is offering out more, we were saying before we just amend the purchase or the buyer-broker agreement because they're giving out more. But now the buyer is saying, no, I'm willing to pay this much.
Yeah.
I'm willing to finance this much, not more.
And that's it. Yeah.
But that was what came out of the case. I think that's the biggest.
I think that'll be a good change.
Impetus for, I think it's helpful both sides. The sellers can negotiate what they're doing. The buyers can now negotiate what they're doing. And we just have to figure out what's in the, as always has been, what's in the best interest
of the clients. Understood. And that's a great point, because buyers did not have the opportunity to negotiate that. What they were essentially rolling into their loan for 30 years, and if you're not paying cash. But that brings me to the next point, Shannon. How problematic is that for VA buyers, or buyers who may only have enough for their down payment, but don't have enough for their closing costs? So they're asking for a contribution from the seller. Then they're having to pay their buyer broker. Does that exclude them from buying a house?
Absolutely. And I think that's where the flaw is. That's going to have to get worked out eventually. Eventually, we're going to have to start practicing this and figure out how do we overcome that? Because right now, that's a big problem. The VA does not allow the veteran to pay commission. If you are wanting to buy a home where your seller is not offering that to your broker, chances are probably pretty slim that your broker is just going to say, well, let's just forget this one and I'll work it for free.
For a veteran, yeah.
Yeah, for a veteran, yeah.
Right. And it's not that we're not good people, but, it's a lot of liability, first of all. It's a lot of time and effort.
Our insurance doesn't cover
it. Doesn't even allow us.
Yeah.
It doesn't even allow us to work for free. There's some problems there. I think that that's going to be one of the issues. The other issue is that we do have a lot of buyers that really don't have a lot of cash. And, that's been the great thing about, the American dream here is, you can, home ownership is available to everybody. How the government has tried so hard over the years to make it available to everybody with programs, 0 down payment or financing a down payment or getting money from, relatives or getting money from your seller. But those are also capped. There's only a certain amount you can take. So if you are banking on getting that for your down payment or to get into a home. And now you've got to use that to pay your realtor. You're almost taking some people out of the market and saying now homeownership is only for the wealthy. And I don't think that is right.
I agree with you.
That's an incredible point. It really is. And especially, it just seems like it's almost a little coordinated. It's a little weird because you have these massive hedge funds now that are buying up properties so fast that they put some projections out there that, there could be 30% of the United States market purchased up by State Street, Vanguard, BlackRock over the next 10, 15 years. Have you heard any of that?
You guys know how I feel about all of that
She's
already.
Been a megaphone for this
I have
years.
been, and I agree very much. This makes it extremely easy for corporations and investors and second plus time home buyers to purchase a home. It makes it very hard for the first time home
That's
buyer.
my fear. The only people that are going to afford
they can't afford
now,
it.
are going to be the big pockets. And that's not what the American dream is about.
Yeah. And so they ramped up,
everyone.
they created a ramp up for these hedge funds and these big corporations to buy single family site built or manufactured homes across America, and they're gobbling them up. And then you've tamped down the ability for a buyer who may not have, or maybe in a position where they cannot pay their broker. They have enough for their down payment. They don't have enough for closing costs. They're capped on the contribution that they can get from a seller. And now you're putting the handcuffs on buyers who could purchase and live out the American dream and build wealth themselves. That's,
I've had a lot of people ask me, how is this going to affect your business? And I'm like, not really at all, because I don't mainly work with first-time home buyers. I think people that really support the first-time home buyer, which is how I kind of started, but I transitioned out of that a little bit. I think it's going to be a big deal for those people, but people like that do commercial and investments and second, third, fourth homes, it's probably not going to be that big of a difference.
Yeah.
But it's going to be a big transition.
What do you think percentage-wise the buyers that we work with they have enough for their down payment, but they need a contribution from the seller for their closing costs, and they do not have any discretionary funds to purchase? What percentage of buyers? Just
mine low. I don't have that much. Maybe
mine very high. I'd say at least in my career, 80 to 90% of my buyers have asked for closing cost concessions.
Yeah.
And that's going to price them out.
Yeah. Paul, what are your thoughts? What's your
I deal mostly with sellers, and my buyers are mostly veterans. So veterans, it's almost 100% we ask for something. But the sellers, I think it's, 40 to 50% we get offers that have the closing cost concession in there. It's not 80 to 90, but it's not zero.
Yeah.
Melissa does a lot with first-time home buyers.
You do a lot
primarily with first-time home buyers.
Yeah. Yep. And so that percentage is a lot higher because they just haven't had the opportunity to build the wealth, to be able to afford the extra money needed to compensate now a broker. So how many of the sellers out there are going to realize that and say, you know what, I want to compensate my listing realtor, but I understand I don't want to necessarily exclude all the buyers, the potential buyers out there that may not have enough money to compensate their realtor. So I'm going to offer out that commission, that co-broke. So maybe we'll have more sellers that step up to the plate and say, I understand I don't want to exclude the veteran, right? Because they're not allowed to pay a commission.
And I think people that have probably sold a house in the past are going to be really easy to see that advantage. They're going to be able to say, hey, this is what I've always done. This is absolutely okay.
Sellers were once buyers.
That's
right.
And sellers do become buyers when they sell. So it does hit on both sides. We've only got a couple minutes left, but I just want to move to the speed round real quick. Final thoughts. Paul, kick us off. The biggest pro and the biggest con of the settlement. What are your thoughts there?
The biggest pro is I think that buyers and sellers will be confident in what they've negotiated. They think they've gotten a fair deal. And if they don't, that's because they didn't negotiate very well. It's always been negotiable. Now it's set in stone that this is negotiable. I think the con for newer realtors, this is going to be hard because this is going to turn into a pros market. If you don't know how to navigate these waters and explain to wishy-washy buyers how this works, it's going to be hard to get business.
Your value proposition. Yep, absolutely. Melissa, what are your thoughts? Biggest pro, biggest con?
Biggest pros are buyers and sellers obtaining more knowledge in the process. The biggest con is a lot of first-time home buyers are now not going to be able to purchase a home.
Fair enough. Sad reality. Hopefully that isn't the norm, but it's very likely. Aspen.
Pro, I would say that buyers can now negotiate their commission, which I think is a positive. I think they're going to get a lot more knowledge. I think sellers have been at least in our area, pretty knowledgeable about where the funds are going, but at buyers, not so much. So I think that that's going to be a really good brought to light. But con, I think it's going to be the lending side. I think is going to get really confusing. And I think pre-approvals are going to go down because now, like Paul said, we're going to have to account for this percentage of commission to go in. So I think that's going to be the biggest con is people aren't going to be able to get approved for as much or maybe not at all.
Yeah. Yep. Great points. Shannon, biggest pro, biggest con.
I say the biggest pro is we have probably a more clear defined relationship with our buyers now with a buyer broker agreement. I think with that, we are educating them more. So I think that's a good thing. I think on the con side, I just agree with everybody. I think we're just starting to price some people out. And I think maybe eventually we find a way around that. A program comes in, something changes. For the short term, I think we're pricing some people out of the market. And I think that's the biggest downfall to this. I don't think that really helps the public much.
Understood. Fantastic. And my thoughts very much similar to yours in the sense that I think education, slowing the process down a little bit, especially with the buyers and saying, let's do this right. Okay. Is always a good thing. Allowing them to negotiate on both sides. It's always been negotiable. As Paul said, these have always been negotiable, but allows us also as professionals to really convey our value proposition. What do we bring to the table to help our clients? That's the biggest pro. The biggest con for me is definitely the fact that we're taking a very transparent platform and we're moving into the shadows. And I feel like there's going to be some rub there where broker to broker, you're trying to negotiate a commission, and that may influence the deal, which I hate that component. I think those should be completely separated and decoupled altogether. But the reality is it's very likely to happen. And I think that's problematic, and we're pricing out some of those first-time home buyers, which I don't like as well. So very interesting thoughts. There you have it. The Lyons Group today, industry leaders talking about tough topics. So top brokers taking on tough questions. And this one's a big one. We're going to hear a lot about this. So if you have questions about the NAR settlement, how it's going to affect you as either a buyer or a seller, please reach out to us because we are open books. We love to have these discussions. These are next level discussions. And this is where our strategies come from. This is where the Lyons Group, the rubber hits the road, and we can really make a difference for our clients because we are on the leading edge of what's happening in today's real estate. So thank you for tuning in today. Thank you for joining us at The Den. And until next time, we'll see you then.
Thank you for listening to The Den, powered by the Lyons Group. Hit the subscribe button to keep informed on real estate happenings. If you'd like to learn more about the Lyons Group, visit sjcbroker.com. Complex markets require complex strategies. The Lyons Group can give you a true advantage in any market. Whether you're buying or selling, residential or commercial, contact us directly at sjcbroker.com. We're time-tested experts with a client-first approach, and we'll see you next time in The Den.